We're here at the Maps Museum at Akron-Canton Airport, on the west side of Akron-Canton Airport. Our guest today is, the word amazing is kind of misused, but I'm sure going to use it on this guy because it does apply. We're sitting in front of a World War I British Sopwith airplane that this gentleman right here, this young guy, built all by himself, piece by piece. And I want to introduce Bill Woodell. Bill, it's my pleasure to have you here.
Thank you.
I enjoyed your talk over at the Turkeyfoot Island Club, but now, Bill, tell us about your flying background.
Well, I always wanted to be a pilot back when I was a child, much to the concern of my parents. But they did allow me to go into the Naval Flight Training Program that was carried on in World War II, the V5. And they'd been losing pilots at a lesser rate by the time I got in, so that the program was stretched out and out and out, and so the war was over before I learned to fly. But I did learn to fly the mighty Stearman, and then I got out. I maintained a private pilot's license and flew in a Firestone Flying Club for a while, and then when my children came, I had to give that up and got back into it in preparation for trying to learn to fly again, this airplane that Ernie was talking about that I built, the Sopwith triplane.
Well, Bill, what gave you the idea to build this thing?
I've been asked that over and over, and I'm not sure. I don't think I thought it was anything special when I was reading about them in the dime novels, dime magazines you could get in that period. But I did draw a picture of one of these, it turns out, and hung it over my bed and slept under it for about a year. It was attacking an albatross, which I was more interested in. And maybe there is something to subliminal thought. But when the fad started coming back to build World War I airplanes, I somehow picked this one out. Read about it. It was supposed to have been a nice flying machine, and it was historically important. So I got the blueprints from Hawker Siddeley, which had been Sopwith during World War I. In fact, Thomas Sopwith was still chairman of the board when I ordered these. He lived to be 105, and his last project was a Harrier. So anyway, I got the blueprints. Was not too sure I could do this, although it's sort of model airplanes were patterned after this type of construction. And I built it as they built the original, with a box girder fuselage, which is wood, wire braced, and turnbuckle tension. Takes a lot of time and a lot of parts. Now, Ernie said I did this all alone. I did have some dedicated help from a few fellows that I worked with. One was a good machinist, Steve Griebling, and he made some parts that I would still be looking for if he hadn't done it. But it's something that I did make sure it kept going. You got to do something every day on a deal like this, and this took me 18 years. I was, of course, working and traveling. But if you don't stay with it, you'll get behind the curve and it'll never get done.
18 years. That's a work of art back there. And the big thing is it's got 3 wings on it.
Right. The previous airplane that Sopwith had turned out for the Royal Naval Air Service was a Sopwith Pup, a biplane. The wings were 5 feet wide. And there was some consideration to try to make the pilot's visibility better. And they wondered if they split the wings up into thirds, keeping about the same area, would he see better? So this was a result of that. Mm-hmm. The low wing sits where the pilot can see ahead of it. The top wing sits so he can see behind it. And the mid wings stop on the cabane struts so they don't really interrupt much. But I think what they wound up doing was creating an airplane that had a higher aspect ratio wings, which are more efficient. This airplane was immediately preceded the Camel in the production line, and the Camel with only 2 wings and the same engine was a slower airplane than this one is, which you wouldn't really expect.
Did this airplane see combat or much combat?
Yes, this was brought in at the request of the British Army because their government designed and built planes were not able to maneuver, they asked the Navy to bring in some of their airplanes built by private industry to give them a hand. Yes, this made a big impression on the German Air Force, especially Jasta 11, which was Richthofen's outfit, and he was flying against them. In a 3-month period, 5 Canadian pilots flying these, led by Raymond Collishaw, were credited with 87 German airplanes shot down, and they lost 1, and he was lost by engine failure. So this got the Germans' attention, and they built triplanes big time. And by the time they got theirs in service, this one would have been replaced by the Camel with its 2 guns.
This is a single pilot airplane also.
Oh yes, this is a do-it-yourself project as well as learning to fly it, because there's nobody left to tell you how to do it.
So you figured it out. You actually flew it up here, didn't you?
No, I trucked it up here. I've flown it a couple times at Wadsworth. It has a rotary engine where the crank stands still and the engine spins. This takes a little bit of thinking about, but it turns out when you do it for real, it's pretty instinctive. You do what's necessary to make it work. And I will say this about rotary engines, something I hadn't anticipated. They are as smooth as an electric motor. All of the vibration is damped in the spinning mass because the engine's turning with the propeller. And to get even close to the performance that they had back in World War I, you either got to put a rotary on it, or you have to get about 3 times the rated horsepower that these are rated at to do the same job. Because these will spin a big propeller that's very efficient. A crankshaft turning engine won't.
Well, that's a Leron engine you have in this?
Yes, it's an original. Well, it was built by Union Switch and Signal in this country during World War I, but it's built under a license from Leron. And it's about 680 cubic inches, but it's only rated at 80 horsepower.
80 horsepower, and it shot down, what, 84 German airplanes?
Well, in World War I, they used a Clerget. I tried to find Clergets, and the airplane's actually built to take one if I ever found it. But I made some adjustments then with the Leron. It being lighter, I moved it forward. And the center of gravity is not shown on the blueprints, but a British outfit was building one of these for a museum there, and they got an aeronautical engineer to tell them where it was. And fortunately, my CG was within the limits.
Well, great. Now, on your first flight, how did you prepare for that?
Well, prayerfully. I had flown Cubs and Champs to get back into tail dragger mode, because this is an airplane that has no brakes. It's got a tail skid, and I never flown one of those. And of course, I never flew with a rotary engine, but the sitting in the back seat of a Champ was not too different from the nose of sitting in the seat in this airplane. And you just fire it up and hope for the best. Actually, the first flight was a little nerve-wracking because the airspeed indicator plumbing wasn't connected tightly, and I didn't get any readings. So I had to fly it by the way it felt, and I certainly had no clue as to how it's supposed to feel. But it being a pretty forgiving airplane, it let me get up and down without a whole lot of trouble.
How many times did you fly it out at Wadsworth?
Well, I tried 4 times. I actually flew it twice.
Tried 4 times.
The airplane has a problem that was initially designed into it that nobody told me about, and they didn't. Airplanes back in that era never taxied anywhere. They just fired them up and took off. They had bronze bushings and an aluminum axle. And when you roll those a long distance, they get hot and they act like you got brakes. So on 2 occasions, I attempted to take off with the engine starting quickly after having pushed it into position, and I couldn't get up enough speed to get up. When the wheels are cold, the thing takes off in about 150 feet. And when you land, the tail skid brings it to a halt in about an airplane length and a half.
And they're still working on short takeoff and landing airplanes. Big breakthrough in aerodynamics. You guys had it back during World War I.
Right. Well, another feature this airplane has that I've experimented with and got surprised is it has a flying tail. there's a big wheel by the pilot's right knee that operates a triple pitch jack screw, and when you move that thing, a lot happens. One test pilot said you could set that thing where you wanted it with the engine 3/4 full, take your hands off the stick, and it would loop till it ran out of gas.
Did you try that?
No, I didn't. I actually put a nose down component into it and wasn't prepared for when it acted. It shot me out of the cockpit, blew my goggles over my head, and for a minute I thought I'm having big trouble. But got back down in the seat and managed to fly it that way.
Did you wear a parachute when you took it?
No, they didn't wear parachutes back then, and I don't know that you could bail out of this thing because you're surrounded by brace wires. So I flew it the way they did, was hoping for the best.
Did you wear a silk scarf too?
Oh yeah, the silk scarf is needed in case the lubrication, which is castor oil from the Lerone engine and is sprayed out when it isn't burned, can get on the windshield and your goggles. Well, in this case, that wasn't necessary. Sopwith had built a tunnel underneath the fuselage, which seems to take the fumes and everything from the exhaust around the airplane, and it misses the cockpit. I smelled oil smoke when it starts up. It smells like a model airplane, but that was the only occasion, and as the engine then runs, it goes past you.
Well, that was quite a journey. 18 years you worked on it. How many hours would you estimate?
I don't even want to know. I did figure out how much money I had in it, and I could have bought a fairly decent used airplane for that price, and this thing takes a crew to operate, so it wasn't very practical.
Well, would you say the money that you did put into it?
I'm sorry?
How much money did you put into it?
Well, the engine cost $10,000, and I had $8,000 in raw materials. And of course, this isn't paying the guys who were helping me do what they did.
And $200,000 in labor.
If I were being paid the way I was at Firestone, it'd probably be something like that. But
now, this Lerone engine, when you fly it, there's a lot of torque, meaning pull, right?
well, it's a gyroscope, so it produces a lot of torque with the propeller. You don't feel that, except if you change attitude. In any axis, you do something, there's a 90-degree reaction on the precession of it. Certainly nothing you can't cope with. And I've heard it said, I can't confirm this, that a Sopwith Camel using a rotary engine, that if the pilot made a right turn, both of his eyes would end up on the same side of his nose.
How about a left turn? Would that be tough to make?
Left turn, no, it just takes a little more rudder to get it around.
Do you have to throttle back to make a left turn in that?
I didn't. No, you can leave the throttle pretty much alone till you're maneuvering to land. But then when you pull it back to the slowest setting you can get it, the prop is still putting out too much thrust. So you have something called a coupe button, kill switch on the stick, and you depress that momentarily to kind of alter your glide path to fit it to what you want. And then when you get down close to the ground, you hold it down and let it land.
How many of these now are flyable?
Not too many. There was one in England that were being built at the same time I was building this, and they had an accident with it at Shuttleworth in April that is going to make a lot of repairs necessary before it goes up again. The others there's one in California owned by a wealthy Mexican that is, well, he's flown it. I don't know how many. I don't know that he flies it a lot. There's an original in England, I suppose, could be flown if they really worked on it. It's in the Royal Air Force Museum. And there's one in Moscow that the British had given to the Tsar in World War I, and it flew on skis for him, and then apparently flew through the Red Revolution as a red airplane, and then they used it as a trainer in the 20s and 30s, and then within the last 15, 20 years it showed up and was put in a museum. It's been altered somewhat.
Well, now this, for example, have you had offers to sell to museums?
Uh, I've had some offers from one fellow. It was a executive with Chrysler, wanted to buy it and keep it up in Michigan, and told me I could come up and fly it anytime I wanted to. But I'm reluctant to let anybody else fly it because I built it, and I suppose I would be liable for anything that went wrong. As a matter of fact, you can no longer get the blueprints for anything that Sopwith put out because somebody built a Sopwith pup and got hurt, and either he or his heirs sued Hawker Siddeley for having made it possible for him to do this, and won. So I take responsibility for what I did, but I don't want anybody to get hurt on what I did.
Well, you had to call the FAA down to inspect it?
Well, they came down and inspected the first part that I made, the center section of the top wing, which is a pretty insignificant piece. And then as soon as he got back home, he informed me that they weren't going to do that anymore. You're going to inspect the entire airplane. So this gives you kind of a dry in the mouth feeling that if you make a mistake, nobody's going to notice it till too late. But they inspected this when I was ready to, when I had it completed. But again, they had never seen anything like it, and were more interested in watching the engine run than they were anything else. And since there's only one guy going to get hurt if something goes bad, they signed off rather quickly.
None of them wanted to maybe fly it.
No, there was no offers for that.
Thank heaven.
Right.
Now, you also have a PowerPoint presentation on this.
Yeah, I've given it to a bunch of groups that for some reason wanted to hear about it. It goes through much of what we've just discussed, but one thing about it is there's a view of it sitting in my basement when I was building the fuselage. Had the tail on it to check for fit, and my wife, who hated the project, opened up the door and was sure that I was going to tear the house down to get this out. But the one advantage to building a box girder airplane is if you tag everything, you can take it all apart and it becomes like an erector set. You can stick the long parts out a basement window or whatever and set it up out in the driveway, which I did.
Have you made any plans for the future on where this is going to go?
No, I suppose that's going to be a problem for my children. But,
you're going to leave it? So am I. When they look at my collection of things, I said, it's going to be Emily and the rest of the kids. It's going to be their problem.
Yeah, well, I might suggest that they sell it to a museum, but with the stipulation that it not be flown.
That's a good idea. You always get a guy who's not much experience that thinks he can do it.
Well, the accidents can happen, and then this one I spoke of is on YouTube, shows the Shuttleworth collections, Sopwith triplane, and the guy landed long, and he let a wheel hit a fence post, and this sort of cartwheeled him and did major damage to the front end of the airplane and the top wing. And you don't want that to happen.
Oh, you don't. Now, looking at the tire, where did you get the tires?
Well, it turns out that in the original airplane, they used a metric Palmer Air-Accord tire and 700 by 75, and this worked out to I think it was a 325/19 motorcycle tire. And I bought motorcycle wheels, and I had to re-spoke them because the Palmer wheel used radial spokes. There's no torque on this since there's no brakes. And I had some buddies at Firestone where I worked that in their noon hours, they were in the prototype shop. They took a couple of Firestone motorcycle tires, removed the tread because there was no design on these tires, and carved in the right nomenclature on the side so they looked pretty real. And I'm lucky to have gotten that. Not too many guys in this field wind up with that kind of thing.
You're lucky to have buddy engineers.
Yes, it seemed like every time I hit a snag that looked like it was going to stop me, somebody came forward that could fix it and did.
Now, the Lerone engine, you paid $10,000. Where did you find that?
Well, there was a guy in Wisconsin who built airplanes for museums, and he had built a Sopwith triplane. And I got in touch with him, and he was a pretty, he didn't want anybody wasting his time because he was busy. And he built one of these that's in the Rockcliffe Royal Canadian Air Force Museum, and it honors Collishaw. And I'd seen that. And after he decided I was for real, he had a Newport with this engine in it, and his customer wanted a bigger engine. So he took the engine out. It had something like 20 hours on it. And it was for sale, and he called and let me know. So I got it before anybody else did.
Well, this was the original Lerone engine made by...
the United States had nothing in World War I to speak of. But they did make Hispano-Suiza liquid-cooled engines, the Wright company did. And they made Gnome rotaries, and they also made Lerone. And these were for training planes. And this was made probably over around Pittsburgh. And the French engineer who watched the process being used said these were going to be the finest Lerones ever made because the techniques the U.S. was using were better than what the French were doing. So I got one of them. And
so the engine, actually, how old is it?
well, it was made in 1917, so it's a pretty old engine.
Talk about metal fatigue.
It hadn't had much service. I think when there was some prejudice against rotary engines, and I think a lot of these became boat anchors when the war ended. And there were a few of them were converted to be stationary engine with a rotating crank, and the 80 Lerone was then rated at 120 horsepower. But they turned slower, well, they turned faster speed and so forth.
Well, that's a great story, and it's a great project you had here, Bill. Well, thank you very much for sharing it with us. And it's okay with you if we go up and take a look at it closer.
Sure.
Okay. Well, no fingerprints on the airplane.
Well, it'll be dust prints because I haven't been out here to clean it up like I should.
Okay. Thanks again. Okay, we're going to end the interview here with Bill had written a poem. Bill is a gentleman who built this airplane, this Sopwith triplane, an airplane with 3 wings that fought in World War I. And the 5 Canadian pilots shot down 84 German, 87 German airplanes. Okay, and Bill has written a poem, and I see it's about the B-26.
No, this is the antique. This is my poem about that airplane.
Oh, the poem about this airplane. Did you have one about a B-26 too, or?
Well, yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, here, Bill is going to recite it for you.
What is it that would make a man do what he can't explain? Like build an antique aircraft and not for private gain. For in my case, and I know not why, the project that I chose, long extinct before my birth, should catch me in its throes and drive me on to understand high tech of long ago, where few remain or can explain those skills so apropos, or so impress the need to heed the blueprints as they're shown, that years passed by before I'd fly, myself an antique grown. I chose a Sopwith triplane from my hero worship youth, a plane as fame is now confined to us most long in tooth. For if you mention Sopwith, the Camel comes to mind, and if you blurt out triplane, must be the Fokker kind. Well, anyway, I have one, and for better or for worse, it even has a rotary to help deplete my purse. For castor oil is now precious, even measured by the drop, and oil, Lerone's all spit and burn, rotating with the prop. Seated in the cockpit, it was a feat to make the trip, pulling, climbing, over-under, standing on a narrow strip. The view out through the windscreen's a commanding one, all right, for it's the gun butt of the Vickers that takes away your sight. There is a tidy dashboard, but it's placed in such a way that you duck below the crash pad to read what gauges say. When you have answered contact and the prop is heaved round, if the prime has started firing, you'll be treated to the sound. You'll also sniff some oil smoke that the prop wash blows away as your left hand plays with levers, finds the mixture for the day. Keeping down upon your tail skid is what you try to do, though the lip atop the seat back cuts its way right into you. When the engine is in order, shows 1200 on the tack, it's time to think of wheel chocks as you throttle right on back. When cruise has responded to your signal and you know you're free to go, then you open up the levers to the numbers that you know. The thrust is something special. You'll have little time to wait, get the nose down on the level, give her rudder, keep her straight. And long before you're ready, you will begin to fly. The triplane soars above the grass and races for the sky. The precession of a gyro is always on your mind, for a change on any axis makes a change of different kind. All the info that you're feeling through the cables to the stick, like a living creature awakened, and you caused it. What a kick. A roll to left's revealing the ailerons are weak, with all 3 down and 3 more up its rudder that you seek. Peering past the wingly clutter, get adjusted to the scene, see behind and over under where you're going, where you've been. When it's time to turn to final and your heart rate's up a touch, trim the levers for slow running. Use the blip switch for your crutch. Now you're lined up with the windsock and the grass is near at hand. Squeeze hard on that blip switch, haul on back and let her land. Do your 2-step on the rudder as you whistle to the grass. We're talking little distance for the skid to halt the mass. Back again inside your hangar, what a mess the oil has made. Dripping, staining, smelling. Now you work for when you played. There's no way to explain this to the ordinary man, why you fought to recreate what to most lived out its span. Maybe an Irenaeus incarnation, as some would choose believe, or an old man with expensive toys, as others do perceive. Whatever's the answer, and I really don't know why, when you factor in the hangar rent, there are cheaper ways to fly.
Very good. One other question. Where were the machine guns mounted on the original?
The airplane was set up for 1 gun and then 2 guns. They sat on the cowling ahead of the pilot. If it's a 1-gun deal, it's straight in the middle. If it's 2, he sights through the middle with a ring sight. It uses an interrupter gear where a cam on the back of the spinning engine activates some machinery that blocks the trigger when the propeller is about to get in the way and then releases it when it's leaving.
On the early ones, or early other airplanes, didn't they have the gun on top of the wing?
Before they solved the problem of interrupting, the SE-5 and a Newport had a Lewis gun mounted over the cockpit, and this presented a rather acrobatic feat to get the spent cartridges out of it and a new drum put on. And finally, a system was made where there was a track that the pilot could pull some levers and pull it down his face and take it off. But that shot above the propeller.
Mm-hmm.
And then...
Well, folks, would you advise anybody as a hobby to try to build one of these?
No, I was advised by the man who had built the one for the Rockcliffe Museum for the Canadians that this was the hardest airplane he had ever tackled and not to do it. And I should do a Newport or something which was pretty basic.
That spurred you on then.
He didn't stop me, that's right.
Well, thanks a lot again. We called you back for this poem, and that is very good, very good. It tells the story of why you did it, but you're still trying to find out why, right?
Yes, I can't excuse myself.
Okay, Bill.